I'm Tony Ruiz, contributing editor at Gold Derby, here with Robert Jonathan Koeyers, who has made a really beautiful animated short called "It's Nice." It's nice in here, and I have so many questions about this film. Um, but just kind of to start off, how what do you think is the thesis of this film? Because I feel like there's so many things that can be taken from it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think the film deals with a lot of things and tries to tackle a lot of things as well. It's about subjectivity and it's about how we tell stories about people who are no longer there to tell them. But it's also about how the media tells their own narrative and can completely spin a narrative out of what is actually the truth. So there's yeah, it's about perception. It's about how do we look at Black bodies? How do we tell stories about Black bodies? And ultimately, I think we're raising more questions than we really are answering them. So yeah, it's a film that wants to explore a lot of things and try to tell a lot of things. Yeah.
Well, so I'm always curious, where does the idea begin?
Yeah.
Especially when you're tackling, because we tend to think of animated shorts as, being, whimsical or being, or emotional, but to use animation to tackle such an important kind of political topic and social topic, where did that idea begin for you?
Yeah, so I think like two things coincided at once. I was studying animation in Rotterdam, and I was working on my graduation film, my thesis film, and I was looking around also at my own work that I had been making, I had always made a very personal work, but looking at the characters that I was designing and animating, they all looked very similar. They were like white characters that didn't look like me at all. And in my final year of the academy, I started realizing like, why am I not telling stories about people that look like me? And this was also during the same time where I saw these horrific stories from the United States, of like Philando Castile and countless of Black men being shot by police officers. And I had so many feelings and I had to like process it in one way or another. So that's where I started writing a lot of like the hurt that I was feeling. And out of that, this sort of fragmented film came out of that basically.
I'm so glad you used the word fragmented because, like so many things, when we try to remember things, it's not always a clean narrative. It's very fragmented, and I think it loans itself to this particular story when we're trying to talk about things like the media and racially involved shootings by police officers. And so I'm curious as to, of those fragments, was there one particular fragment that started the whole thing?
Good question. You mean in the film, like a
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I think the film started off like with like different images in my mind that I then would like draw on a piece of paper. Um, there was like there's some shots in the film that are very that mean a lot to me. There's like the main character wears his red hoodie, and there's a shot where the redness of the hoodie sort of like leaks out of it. I think that was like one of the earlier images that I had. But there's also like these tiny moments, where we see a hand pass like a locked car or a car door, and then we see the cars being locked. So it's all of those moments that also are familiar to me, of like as a Black man, how I navigate through the world, and these small moments that to me I'm sort of like expecting now, like to make them almost like poetic in the film.
I was stunned by the voice performances in this. They're so beautiful and so nuanced. And I'm curious, from a directing standpoint, how did you work with the performers?
Yeah, so these were or at least the girl is like a non-actor. I worked with her before on a smaller
She's
production.
outstanding, by the way. I
Yes,
mean,
I
just
agree.
breaks your heart.
Yes, yes. Um, I mean, she has a certain I mean, if you ever get to like talk to her, like she's a very mature person. Like she's only like 11 years old, or she was 11 years old when we recorded her voice. But there's this quality to her voice that is indeed like very heartbreaking and We talked a lot about like what the story means and also who the character is. And together with her, I also developed this character further. So that was really nice, this back and forth of who is Imani and how does she feel about this boy or her best friend. And how do we capture that hurt? So yeah, and that grief in her voice. And I think, yeah, I think she did a really amazing job.
There's a moment, and you alluded to it earlier, the references to the magnetic hands that lock the car doors, even though we all know that that's being done from the inside. When you in the fireworks that are actually fireworks, uh, in 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 using that kind of like it's almost kind of metaphorical language. Was that something that was important to you to include?
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a certain like naivete there, you know, of like a child looking at the world and perhaps not fully recognizing their own blackness yet, or how they yeah, how they walk through the world or how the world perceives them. So um it's also a reminder that the story is about children and that they have like they have so much imagination still and uh so much beauty in the way they look at the world. So for them it is like this thing that they share together, this beautiful poetic thing, even though we as a viewer we know what this means, and we know that it is actually like from yeah, yeah, the world reacting to their black bodies basically.
I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is there also maybe like that naivete that maybe uh, white audiences might feel that, not understanding the perspectives of people of color?
Yeah, 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 for sure. I think so. Yeah. I think as I was writing it, I was trying to, yeah, the film is very much like how different people look at black bodies. So it's very much like how this girl, this black girl looks at like the world around her, but also how other people might look at black at their exact same black bodies and perhaps see different things. So I was constantly always also trying to shift back and forth of who is looking at this world or these characters or this part of the story through a black lens, but also sometimes through a lens that is not black. Yeah.
I felt like obviously one of the most important scenes in the film is the scene in the convenience store where the shooting takes place. And what I found so interesting was that you managed to, in a very short amount of time, cover a multitude of perspectives so that it is not, you know, pun intended or not intended, it's not just black and white.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did you go about planning out that scene?
Yeah, I think during the writing process, well, the entire film, the structure of the entire film is very much about like juxtaposition. It's very much about contrast. So whereas like the girl sees this boy as a really beautiful, sensitive, vulnerable boy, the police officer looks at him in a completely different way, also to justify his own actions. And in a convenience store, everything clashes against each other, and we wanted to make it very abrasive and very hectic to have yeah, these narratives be sort of um yeah, like I said, clashing against each other. But then also we're introducing like different perspectives as well, like how a dash cam looks at the footage, or how a CCTV camera looks at the incident. So we are also playing a lot with not just like their subjective points of view, but also like a more objective point of view that still doesn't capture everything that happened.
Yeah, and the ambiguity of that, there was a certain amount of ambiguity I felt like in that sequence, so that as a viewer you don't necessarily know what the real story is. And I think, was that intentional on your part?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I feel like the whole film, if you look at it very carefully, there's like sometimes there's a shot that takes like literally a second, but that reveals a lot about the story. And that's also what we see in real life, right? We catch glimpses of a person or fragments of something, but we don't get to see the whole person of who they were, or how they got there, or what actually happened. So I wanted to play with this lack of certainty and only being able to really yeah, trust what we see or trust what we remember, and try to question what does that mean that we remember those parts and not the other parts that we saw in the film as well.
Was there ever any inclination to have it be more definitive?
Um, there have been thoughts about like having a more conclusive ending where I feel like the film very much like calls for poetic justice at times, where I feel like especially as we were making it, you know, like we were making it during like the protests of George Floyd and um, trying to look at the police officer through his eyes and through his lens at this world was really difficult at times. So there were definitely times where we wanted to change the ending and sort of like yeah, make it feel um, yeah, I don't know that he gets punished or that he gets like that he gets locked away, but ultimately it didn't feel right or it didn't feel true because we don't really see that happening in real life either. So we knew that we, yeah, I don't know, it was stronger to at the very end of the film introduce this third perspective of this boy himself and know that we would never fully be able to hear his side of the story either.
And yet the way that you kind of introduced the boy at the end is also very touching with the use of the multitude of colors. What was the kind of genesis of that idea?
Yeah, so Crimson is like a boy who likes walking around and he likes drawing and he likes capturing the world in his own, again, very imaginative, beautiful way. And whereas the film is very much about like how different people look at him, we wanted to think about how does he look at the world and how does he look at himself. So it's a world that feels to me at least very magical, ethereal, outside of this world, and completely unconcerned um, about these daily struggles that he faces. So we wanted to just capture this really beautiful, colorful, rich world in which he now feels nice, basically. Yeah.
I it's always interesting when you're when dealing with subjects like this. We see documentaries, we see nonfiction pieces about it, but animation, doesn't always tackle this type of thing. What do you think animation can do with a subject like this that maybe other genres can't?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think one of the reasons why it was animated is well, first of all, we could play with like different visual styles, right? So we could um, draw this one boy in three different ways, and that's something that would be more difficult to achieve in live action, for instance. So, but also this whole thing of like with an animated film, we're not really expecting such a harsh ending, you know, or so we're also we're building the film up and almost lulling you into like a sense of security, but then ultimately still there's this harshness that's attached to that. So um, in terms of that, we felt like it had to be animation because we we felt like things could just like come together in a beautiful way, and everything is also constructed, and that's also very much like our memories are, you know? So we could have things disappear in the background or things reappear or change colors to just really emphasize that fallibility of our memories.
Maybe I'm off in my interpretation here, but one of the things that struck me was, you know, throughout most of the film, you have these, again, these very stylized, very, fragmented images and these very beautiful poetic images. And yet, to me, one of the most realistic images are the juxtaposed media shots, like the news and the YouTube video, the
Yeah.
YouTuber, and those seem so realistic to me that for a brief moment I forgot that it was animation.
Mm.
Was that intentional, or was that just is that just me?
um, I mean, we did a lot of research for those scenes. We watched we looked at a lot of like news reports of these shootings and also on the other side we also went to YouTube and we looked at a lot of like very conservative outlets and look at how they spin their narratives. So it was very much like based on reality and we very carefully looked at the language that they used and then made those made those shots basically. So no, I definitely get what you mean with that.
Uh, where are we now in terms of? I feel like you had all these cases of like George Floyd and 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 yet it almost seems like we don't talk about them anymore. It's like, okay, they've happened and now we're moved on. Have we, or are we just kind of trying to put it off to the side?
Yeah, yeah. I see it always like as a very cyclical thing. So when I just released this film, a lot of people called this sort of like a BLM film or like a George Floyd inspired film, even though this film has been in production for a very long time and it was actually inspired by cases that happened before that. But what I see is that it's constantly it's definitely like this ebb and flow where it comes into our attention and then it sort of like dies down again. But what I notice is that it's so cyclical. So as we were working on the film itself and the murder of George Floyd happened, it felt very strangely like life imitating art or art imitating life, where the exact same things happened where that we were working on basically in real life. So it becomes almost predictable to see how the media is going to tell these stories and how fragmented these stories are.
I really hope people search out this film and find it, because it is just such a great achievement. The film it's nice in here. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the upcoming award season, and stay tuned for more interviews throughout the season. Robert Jonathan Koeyers, a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.